Hola, Nicolás, ¿qué tal?
Hola Ana, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo estás?
Bien, aquí trabajando un poco. ¿Se ha unido ya Hugo? What happened?
Pues justo ahora creo que ha solicitado.
Ok, vale, os dejo, estaré por aquí escuchando. Si me pasa cualquier cosa, me avisáis, ¿vale? A veros.
Muchas
Hola a
gracias.
todos.
Hi Hugo, nice to see you. We are wait a couple of minutes in order to people could connect us.
Hi, Hugo. We can hear you. I think you have to mute. Thank you.
Yeah, there you go. Thanks. That looks like that's working. You can see all my slides.
Yes, we can see it.
Great. I'll stop sharing for a moment while we wait.
There are a lot of people connecting. Hola Karina, ¿qué tal? Realmente,
Hola, Nicolás.
qué alegría veros por aquí otra vez.
Claro, igualmente.
Okay, if you agree, we can begin now because there are a lot of people waiting, but then I will accept. Okay, so it is a pleasure for me to introduce today our guest speaker within the guest lecture series of the Master in Neuroarchitecture at the University of Alicante, Hugo Spiers, Professor of Cognitive Neuroscience and Vice Dean for Enterprise at University College London, Faculty of Brain Sciences. Professor Spiers has over 25 years of research experience in neuroscience and psychology, focusing on how the human brain recalls the past, navigates the present, and imagines the future. His work is internationally recognized for advancing our understanding of spatial cognition, navigation, and memory in real-world environments. He is a co-director of the International Center for Neuroarchitecture and Neurodesign, where his research integrates behavioral methods, neuroimaging techniques, and immersive virtual reality to study navigation in complex environments. This interdisciplinary approach is particularly relevant to neuroarchitecture, and it links brain processes with the design and experience of built environments. In addition to his research activity, Professor Spiers holds several leadership and professional roles, reflecting his strong commitment to knowledge exchange and interdisciplinary collaboration. Before we begin, I would like to note that the session will conclude with a brief Q&A, during which Professor Spiers will respond to selected questions submitted via the chat. Professor Spiers, thank you very much for joining us today. And of course, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me to speak. It's a pleasure to be here. And Sergio, thank you very much for making this possible. And thank you all for at the end of your day taking time to listen to me talk about the work I've been doing. I'll start sharing the screen, and I can oh yeah, here we go. I can see you. That's very helpful. So you should be able to see my title is Neuroarchitecture, my background affiliation, and I know that I'm a co-director of this new center. And for today's talk, it's about 50 minutes. I'm trying to aim for about 50 minutes, so we've got a bit of time for Q&A at the end. And it's really just 3 studies I'm going to focus on research, but I'll try and walk through them as examples. And the first one, if it lets me go, is I'm going to introduce the collaborators at the start of each project who really played the key role. And this part of the segment of tonight's talk is brain responses to street networks during navigation. And we're going to start at the sort of scale of a city, how our brains react to cities, and then go into rooms, and then we're going to look at crowds at the end. With this particular project, on the left side of the screen, Lorelei Howard is shown. She was the first PhD student I ever had in my lab many years ago, 16 years ago. She joined at that time. And we had the ambitious idea that we would turn part of London into a sort of interactive film that people could navigate their way around, a film of London. So a bit like Google Street View, but just full film. So there's no kind of pauses, it just flows. And the idea then was to, instead of just using virtual reality, how people kind of actually experience the city, go on a tour and learn part of a city they didn't know, and then scan their brains using function resonance imaging after they'd explored that city street to look at, as they, inside the scanner, using that film footage, re-experience the street they've been in yesterday, or the sequence of streets. So we did this to look at a range of different things. And what I'm going to focus on today is sort of my colleagues in the architecture department here at Beatrix Emo and João Pinheiro Silva, working with us to just bring in their expertise of analyzing the architecture, the layout of the cities. And Amir Hoyan Jawadi was the postdoc that really pulled all this together. He joined my lab and did a lot of very clever analysis. And finally, the person that's shown there is my co-director, one of my 2 other co-directors, Fiona Zish, who is the associate professor of architecture in the Bartlett School of Architecture in UCLRM. So these are the kind of like the actors who made what I'm going to show you happen. Particularly Lorelei, who put a lot of her life into this. So we'll start with that zoomed out. And as I said, the purpose of this was to explore how our brain reacts in a real city, but using MRI, functional magnetic resonance imaging. And MRI, you cannot move around. It's like heavier than a large African elephant. You know, it's just not mobile. It requires a huge amount of electricity and helium. What you can do is bring the world into the MRI scanner, and that's what we did with our film footage. But I'll start, rather than showing you the film footage, show you a top-down view into London, because this was our question really, was does the brain, as we move through a city, taking a journey somewhere, does it react to the structure, the architecture of the streets around us? And if so, what aspects of them and when, and where in the brain? So sort of 3 questions: where in the brain, where in the city, and to what? What is it reacting to? And here I'm showing an analysis map developed by João and Beatrix, who are applying a method known as space syntax to take the city street network of London and divide it up into all the segments that compose all the city streets, and then run a graph theoretic analysis, so using graph theory measures, over that street network. So rather than just a sequence of streets you're seeing, what you're seeing now is a map of the closeness centrality of central London, at least at the time we ran our brain imaging study in 2014 or so. And you'll notice in black running through it is the River Thames. You notice some streets are really red, so the bridges tend to be quite red. And there's a sort of street in the middle of the top, hopefully my cursor, here we go. The street running across the top here is Oxford Street, where a lot of shopping occurs. And then there's places like Seven Dials, and the Hyde Park is down over here. So what we're pulling out with this particular metric is the closeness centrality, which is if you just took all of these streets and stretched them out and ignored all the particular geometry of the streets, what is the topological connections between them? And which streets are closer to the middle of the network and which are further out? And so the red streets are really in the middle of the network. They're really highly close to the middle. They have a close centrality measure. And the blue ones are very low closeness centrality. And it's not just as simple as like the center of London and everything's close and it sits in the center. You can see some blue streets in the middle of London in some rare places. And certainly the big main streets sort of pop out. And you do see more blue as you head away from the center because naturally it's a network. But it's not the only measure that can be analyzed using graph theory applied to street networks. We also have the betweenness centrality, which is how often would you go through a given street when you're going from any one street to any other street. And again, the bridges come out very high because if you want to get from South London to North London, you tend to need to go over a bridge. Oxford Street is also it's a long line, so it connects many, many streets together, and you would end up using it on many more trips than others. So it kind of, this betweenness centrality sort of pulls out the main traffic conduits through the city and leaves the rest of it kind of blue, a pale blue of not so, of lower betweenness centrality. And it is possible to separate out the betweenness and the closeness. They're very highly related, but they are sufficiently distinct to be able to separate them. And the final measure we're taking into this study is just what we call the degree centrality, or the graph theoreticians call the degree centrality, which is just you take a given street, how many other streets are connected to it. So Duck Lane in London has one street connected to it. It's a dead end. It's very low. It's got the lowest degree centrality of 1. The Seven Dials in London has 6 streets all coming off that little connecting bit. So it has a degree centrality of 6. And all those red streets you can see are high, and again, the blue streets are low. And in this drawing, you can see the River Thames running through it, but you can also be able to see this little white section that's overlaid in the middle of there. And that was our test zone. So it was to that very particular bit of London we chose. Our offices are up here somewhere in Bloomsbury. And so it's not that far away, but it's not somewhere most of the students we tested knew at all well. And it's right in the middle of the north corner of Soho. This is Soho, this little section here. And it's got the densest streets in London with the most landmarks. So if you're making a film, it's perfect. You know where you are if you're watching the film because all the cafes and bars you've been to are there. There's very few just bland streets. And within 20 seconds, you might have chosen your way through 3 or 4 streets because they're so small. And that is what you want to do brain imaging because you can't really stay in the MRI scanner for more than 40 minutes, maybe 50 minutes or something like this. So we took 26 participants there to those streets. They had to walk for 2 hours round and learn their way around and then label maps with the street names and tell us the direction to places and pass a test. They'll let them come back the next day. And inside the scanner the next day, we played them first-person view movies of journeys through those city streets, but a combination of streets they'd never been on before. And there were 2 conditions. There were 24 routes through Soho they experienced. Half of them they had to use their memory of the day before. And every junction, every single time they got to a junction, it would ask them, which way do you want to go? And they were given a goal, like you had to get to Ronnie Scott's Jazz Bar, for example, might be one of the places. And at the junction, you'd have to think, is that on my left or right? Or do I need to go straight on? Or is it, you know, if there's Duck Lane, it's out, you know, the Seven Dials nearby is very hard. So people are making constant decisions as they use their memory to find their way to the target. And they were paid more money if they got there accurately. So they were incentivized. But the other half of the time, we told them, there's a sat-nav running. It'll tell you what to do. As you approach the junction, it'll tell you to turn left if you need to go left, or turn right if you need to turn right. And it would get people there. Sometimes we gave them detours, sometimes we changed the goal during the route. And all this allowed us to simulate a range of questions about how the brain does navigation. And what's shown now here is one of the key figures from our paper in Nature Communications, where we've got an axiometric projection of some of the city space in Soho, and running through it, you can see one of the routes that participants were exposed to. They started off just off Soho Square. Oxford Street runs at the top, and this is the degree centrality. So they're in quite a highly connected street at the start, and that connectedness goes down as they travel through the route, and they're sort of snaking their way through the sequence of streets, making choices as they go. Now, everyone saw exactly the film, so those choices they made didn't affect what actually happened to them at all. They didn't know that, but it allowed us to scan 26 people with exactly the same stimuli every time, and that allows us to take into account a whole range of factors and confounds, and we counterbalance what experience people had. Whether for a given route like this one, half of the participants experienced this route as navigating from memory, and the other half GPS. And the reason I'm showing all this is we got some interesting results. So that's the degree centrality changes. We found that the brain was more responsive to changes in these values than the raw values. So stepping into a very busy street, connected street, doesn't necessarily affect your brain, but it does if you've been in a low connected street before, if you go up. Or if you head into a dead end after you've been in a busy street, the brain activity would tend to go down. And that's the changes for this one route shown of the 24 routes. And here at the top is the responses we recorded along that route for the average brain activity in a really key bit of the brain for navigation called the hippocampus. So what you're seeing on the right side of the screen here is the MRI scan, the structure of people's brain. And you're looking through, you can see someone's eyeball there, and their frontal cortex. And this is a sort of, it's called a coronal slice, cutting through sort of ear to ear through the person's head and in the image data. And it's all gray except for parts that are orange. And those parts that are orange are the statistical analysis showing which bits of the brain do we see more response, more activity in using this method. So if you close your eyes and suddenly you open them in the scanner, the whole back of your brain will be very active and would look, you would get a lot of statistical effects from the visual cortex of your brain. And we don't see that particularly for this metric. It's not interested in the visual features. What the hippocampus seems to be doing is getting active if the number of connections increases. So if I get more active, it's very active when the street is very complex, when there's many local possibilities to navigate, and its activity drops if it enters, if the person navigating enters a dead end, for example. And you can see the responses here for one route of the 24, just as an example. What's important in our data was that we found this nice response, just shown as the parameter estimates, is the amount of brain activity measured here in our statistical model. It's consistently high in every participant and significant. What we see in the sat-nav condition is nothing. It says con, it's the control condition here is the sat-nav. So it shows that when people are navigating a city and using their mobile phone, for example, or driving to decide where to go, their brain is not responding to the city architecture, the street layout at all. There's no automatic response to the architecture. And when we looked at the difference, we looked for brain areas that are specific to navigating from memory more. Only really the right hippocampus came out. Now, the hippocampus, you can see it here marked in this brain, is an absolutely critical part of your brain for memory and navigation. It does that thing of recalling the past, navigating our way through a city, and also we now know it's important for navigating the future, so imagining what's going to happen next. And indeed, this data very much feeds into the idea that your hippocampus, this bit, is very actively simulating what can I do. And the interesting thing here is that people don't know that's what's happening. They're not aware. We asked some participants to guess how many city connections are there at each point, and they're not necessarily aware. But their brain unconsciously, perhaps, is tracking that information. More to the point, like I said, what we want to know is like which bit of the brain seems to be the hippocampus, what feature. It's the degree centrality, the local connections, but it's the entering new streets that matters. So we don't find the response when people are making decisions or traveling down the streets. It's really when you turn a corner or you enter a new street that this response occurs. And in relation to the topic of tonight's talk on neuroarchitecture, I think this is particularly important because this brain imaging method is telling us something about that unfolding experience as we travel through a space, that it's particular moments, particular spatial experiences, like entering a new room or entering a street, that have an effect inside our brain. And it's not just more active, it's dependent upon you thinking with your memory, and it's a particular bit we know from lots of other studies, absolutely crucial to space, and it's doing something interesting. So that's the anterior hippocampus. It's very reactive to degree centrality, so it goes up when there's more local connections. But we actually also found the anterior hippocampus, so this is closer towards the front of the brain, was particularly active for closeness centrality. Pardon me. So you remember at the start, the closeness centrality is like how centrally important is a given street in the whole city network. So Oxford Street in London is very high. So it was very reactive, this part of the brain, when people stepped into Oxford Street. But we can plot out and guess what your brain would be doing, or an average person's brain, as they go through other cities with their anterior hippocampus. So here we can see Manhattan, we can see Warsaw, and we can see Lisbon. And these are the hotspots in red where the maximum closeness centrality occurs. So we can start to predict what the brain might do, a particularly key bit of our brain for representing the large scale structure of a space, where it might get most active in a city space. Finally, for this particular project, when we gave people detours, they had to rethink their route through the city space. They couldn't just take the same route anymore. They had to rethink about it. And sometimes so if we imagine that they're given here they are in the street and there's future options lying ahead of them, they could go left or right. And if they go right, there's more options. But if they're given a detour, they might have to think about these again. And sometimes there's a low number of streets ahead, and sometimes there's more complex options ahead of them. And this is part of what we estimate a brain might do if it was searching through, in this term from research on reinforcement learning and planning, is this breadth first search through, you search through all the local networks spreading out. And we estimated maybe there's a part of the brain that as you pass through a city is more active if I have to think through a lot of the network when I have to rethink about it. And we found exactly that the prefrontal cortex, the lateral area is shown here. So this is just above your eyes to the right sort of side. You can see the edge of the eyeballs here. So it's kind of just above where I'm indicating now, behind my skull, is very active if I have to really think. So you'd imagine this part of the brain is very active in chess players when they're really having to play out the moves. And other studies indeed suggest that that's likely to be the case. So that's the whole large scale, like how our brain, different bits of our brain are responding to different things. Like this bit of the brain on the screen is only interested if you have to take a detour. Like it's not interested if you're just plowing down a street. And this, again, this bit of the brain, if you were to accidentally have a tumor and lose it, you would be terrible at planning your way through a city. But you'd also be terrible at choosing what clothes to wear that day. It's not an architecture, but it's a decision-making planning for the future. So that's the large-scale city. Now I'm going to take you down into the architecture of room spaces. I'm going to stay again with the MRI scanner. And what we decided was that study in London, going through movies through the streets, was very interesting getting at the geometry. But cities have more than geometry. Spaces aren't just boxes and connected spaces. You know, we have aesthetics. We like some places and we don't like other spaces. And, you know, some spaces just might appeal to people. And how does their brain react was the core question to a nice space or an unpleasant space, as opposed to just the geometry. So with a new team, here we are. So Fiona Zish, who was involved in the previous study, will step through all the studies we'll talk about tonight. She's my co-director of our new center. But this particular study was run by Laura Gregorians, who is a PhD student in my lab on the ecological brain program. This is really her PhD I'm going to talk about now. And she's now at the Future Cities lab in Singapore as a postdoc. But while she was in my lab, she was exploring this aspect of how does the brain respond to the complexity of the environment and the aesthetics. We're also joined by Zita Patai, who's been a postdoc in my lab for years and is an excellent fMRI expert, and just collaborated from her research to do this. And finally, the philosopher Pablo Fernandez Velasco, who I've done a range of work now with, who's based at the University of Stirling, and he got involved. And what we spent 1 month, or several months in fact, plowing through lots of YouTube videos that were accessible for public use, of videos that, just like our previous experiments, snaked their way through a set of spaces. But in this case, we wanted to look at mainly indoor spaces, and we wanted spaces that were either unpleasant or pleasant, or complex or simple. So the simplest spaces were tunnels, and the most complicated spaces were like a mansion with hundreds of rooms, you know, or some sort of castle where there's endless places you could end up in. I'll show you some movies in a moment to example. So people have never been to these spaces before. They're exposed to the spaces by a movie in the MRI scanner, and then we look at how the brain reacts to these novel spaces that they've never seen before, in terms of a number of features. It's a rather busy slide, but I'll walk you through it. So we ran two studies with two experiments with this. The first study we published in 2022 was on the how different aspects of these spaces are related to each other, psychological aspects. And the second one just came out. This is 2024, but it just came out this year in Journal of Cognitive Neuroscience. That's a typo at the bottom there. So what we did was first recruit people in, check they're suitable. We did not scan architects. There are two groups we didn't scan. So anyone with an architectural background or interested in space through architecture, we suspected might respond differently to architectural spaces, just based on lots of other comments and discussions. We also didn't scan people who spent lots of hours in first-person view video games, like large online video games like Cyberpunk, because again, their everyday, what takes up a lot of their time watching is very different to the rest of us. But everyone else was eligible to take part. We effectively, and did some surveys with them. They lay in the scanner or just watch from a screen outside. A movie would appear. They would watch the movie and then make a range of judgments about it, and then the next movie would appear, and at the end they would have a debrief. Outside the scanner, in our 70 participant group, we asked lots of questions about each movie, and we'll come to some of those in a moment. In the MRI scanner, we gave people one of two tasks. So in the previous one, it was the previous study in London, it was navigate from memory or use a GPS. This time it was, as you watch this place you're moving through, you're in a movie, decide at the end, do you like it? On a scale of 1 to 5. 5 is like, yeah, you love it. 1 is you really hate it. And then there's nuance between. And we alternated for people between either doing that or deciding, is this a complicated or a simple space? Like, is this, you know, has this got lots of options to it, or is it very, very simple? So these two tasks alternated, and we can look at the brain responses to the task people are doing and to how they stimuli affect people. And then we did a debrief where they had to try and recall the movies afterwards. And we tracked people's eyes and so on. So there's lots of stuff going on in this experiment. And here are some of the, I'll go back, some of the pictures of places that were used in the movie. We tried to find some very boring spaces and some very interesting spaces. And we made sure that we counterbalanced green space and a range of like how many people are in the shots. A whole lot of controls went into this experiment. Here's one of our movies though. So this is a positive movie that most people like. Your watch this is about a 40-minute movie. So your first person view into a space. And as you'll see, it's quite a simple space. There's not hundreds of options. There's like 2 rooms currently you can see. We'll explore in the space. There's a little dog that occurs. People are watching this, so we're scanning people's brain. Instead of navigating a study now, they're trying to maybe decide, do I like this space? If it was me, I would say yes. I really like this space. It's maybe not the best space I've ever been in, but it is a nice space. I like this space. If I was asked, is it complicated? I would say, no, it's pretty simple, but it's not as simple as the tunnel. So the next movie I'll show you is somewhere less pleasant. It's not the most worst space I've ever been in, but it's not pleasant. I wouldn't want to be, but it's much more complicated. You can see there are many, many rooms. And if you asked on a scale of how unusual this is, I'd say very high. I'd never been in a space like this where you're on stilts in the sea. So this is a very high, unusual space. The previous one was I will have been in lots of places like that, or many, not many, but you know, enough. Whereas this is definitely a strange place in this movie. So there's about 60 movies. We had 50 movies in our MRI scan. And in the assessment of people's experiences, they watched these movies and rated a range of things. And we found, for example, in this, if I go through this table, that the hotel room in the Maldives was the most liked, a very luxury hotel, for example, and a decrepit, horrible mansion that was really ruined with horrible decor was the least liked, for example. We also asked people how arousing they found these spaces, and we found a library the least arousing and most sleepy, and a games arcade one of the most stimulating. Again, part of our design was to separate out visual stimulation from complexity. So it might be a complicated space, but it's not, stimulating. The most complicated was indeed a palace with many options, and the least was an industrial tunnel. The most fascinating was an underwater hotel, and the least fascinating was a stairwell in a council house. Coherence was very high in an open plan house, for example, and this really very a rubbish dumped house with loads of some hoarder's house was the least coherent. And these are constructs of coherence, hominess, and unusualness that have come from Anyan Chatterjee's lab looking at aesthetics. And we found very, very similar, replicated his work from still photographs of architecture, in this case using movies, finding very strong correlations between coherence, fascination, and valence, and hominess. So what's shown on the right-hand side of these are the connections we found in our data, where the fascination, how fascinating a space is, seems to connect 6 other elements of people's experience. Fascinating spaces in our set tended to be more arousing, more unusual. They tended to be more positive, more liked, more coherent, and more homey, and indeed more complex in this particular case. So this kind of gives us some insight into what patterns might govern it, how the spaces we create as humans might be connected in terms of psychological experience. But our main interest was looking inside the brain, neuroarchitecture. We're interested in how the brain responds to the architecture. So the first thing I'm going to do now is show you again brain images. So what we've got here on my next slide is on the left side, I'll show you complexity in a moment. So on the left side here, this is what's happening. Again, in gray is the structure of the brain, and in yellow and red, the more yellow it is, the stronger the effect is the areas of the brain that have statistically got more activity. It's robust across our participants. We're scanning 24 participants. These are brain areas that are more active when you're trying to decide, do I like this space or not? And what we see in this activity pattern is the sequence of brain areas that are linked, called the default mode network, are more active when participants are contemplating whether they like a space. It also includes the amygdala, a key bit of the brain involved in emotional processing and typically associated with fear, but it also is for salient stimuli. And the insula, an area to do with bodily awareness and so on, are also active. But particularly most active is the medial prefrontal area, an area that's critical for evaluating the world, particularly the social world. And in this case, people are evaluating spaces. So we now have a first kind of insight into, when you're experiencing a novel space, which part of your brain are you using to decide, do you like it or not? We found a very different set. When we go the other way, what's more active when you're deciding something's complicated? It was brain areas at the top of your head to do with moving your eyes. It's a very boring result for us. There was nothing really exciting. We're hoping to see more to do with complexity. But I think it's partly that decision to decide if you like somewhere really draws a lot of activity of the brain to make that difficult decision. And here's how the movie affects people, not the task, but the actual movie. Is it a nice place or a negative space? By negative, I mean like people don't tend to like it. And we picked movies that were consistent across people. So we scanned people watching a movie, for example. Consistently, people would find it unpleasant. Or if you're watching a movie, it might be consistently found to be positive. There's no kind of in-between in this study. And it would be nice to do a future study with more spaces, but there's only so long you can have people lie in an MRI scanner. So what we found was that a very similar part of the brain as the previous slide, if I go back, this part of the medial prefrontal cortex is also active if you enter positive spaces. So the bit of the brain to do with evaluation and valence is found in many, many studies is indeed more active. So this part of the brain shown at the top here, the ventromedial prefrontal cortex, It's active if you smell nice odors. It's active if you're given delicious juice. It is also active if suddenly somebody throws you some money. You're suddenly now richer. This part of the brain goes up for kind of positive things happening to you. And we now see it here, positive architecture, in the sense of liked. People subjectively like it. What we were really surprised was that the parts of the brain that are linked to memory and processing of space were also active in positive spaces. So people like spaces, they tend to activate the brain areas, including the hippocampus and the parahippocampus, you can see here, but also an area known as the retrosplenial cortex and regions at the back of the brain on the occipital cortex. Overall, the attention, the arousal in the brain to positive light spaces is much higher than negative ones. So we really didn't see anything more active in unpleasant spaces. So maybe we could have chosen some really unpleasant spaces and activated people's responses to just ghastly places, but we didn't do that here. This was sort of unpleasant and pleasant spaces, and the unpleasant doesn't really drive more brain. It's the pleasant ones. Getting to the end of this study, we looked at spatial complexity and saw a very familiar set of brain areas. So the same sort of brain areas, again, in the previous study we were looking at in the hippocampus before, and particularly in this case, the parahippocampus, a brain area next to the hippocampus, that's crucial for processing scenes and spaces, was more active in complicated spaces. Like that movie on the space on the stilts, that would drive a lot of activity in these brain areas. But this wasn't too surprising. What was particularly interesting to me, though, was that you might find a space positive or negative, like you like it or you don't like it, or you might find that it's complicated or not complicated. But there's another aspect to spaces. Some spaces are just not memorable. There'll be hotels or streets or I've been to that I just don't remember them later. And then there are others that are more memorable. This little movie is the first opening segment of a memorable space. People remember this strange little bit of architecture, this little tiny castle. And I'm showing this because, I'll pause this now. What we did after they came out of the scanner was ask people to recall the spaces, and then we showed them short 3-second clips like that to say, can you tell me what happens next? And a space like the one shown, people were very good at recalling why they went, what they saw in that particular space. And what we saw in the brains of participants watching these was very much the hippocampus and the parahippocampus selectively within the brain were more active if a place was later remembered. So sort of memorable spaces, if you create a piece of architecture that people can remember for many years, or even just an hour later, you will tend to have activated these parts of the brain that are crucial for laying down long-term memories. So all of that project was about brains experiencing architecture lying in an MRI scanner. And that's the end of my foray tonight through brain images like the ones on the left that are telling us something about how the different bits of architecture, I mean, it's quite an abstract picture, but if you think about it, this is inside, this is the blood, this is the activity, this is the cells doing stuff for your memories, locking things in. And this is just an a scientific image, but it's happening to you now. But MRI is a problem in that you can't move it. So you're never around other people. You're isolated in a dark space with your head fixed. In this final study I'm going to talk about tonight, which we call 100 Minds in Motion, Fiona Zisch and myself collaborated with several other senior academics, Stephen Gage and Sean Hanna in the architecture department at the Bartlett School of Architecture, and with Nick Tyler, who is the head of the Pearl Laboratory in London in the civil engineering department. And Nick's really important because we wanted to look at this problem, which is that a lot of the spaces, certainly in London, we might experience, we're not walking through a ghost town. There are many people around us as we experience space. And those people tell us a lot about where you can go and not go. And they provide a lot of information. And in the story I've told you so far tonight, we're going to rule people out of it. They weren't involved. But, you could scan people's brains watching movies in crowded spaces. But unless you're actually there, it's difficult. So it's really hard to study how brains and people and their feelings react in crowded spaces. If you did this at Piccadilly Circus in London, you might come back next day and it's all blocked off by the police, or they've changed something, or the weather is terrible. So it's very difficult to study real people's experience on a scale in a city in a controllable, repeatable way. So to get around that, we worked with Nick Tyler, who 5 years ago set up the Pearl Laboratory, which is the Person Environment Activity Research Laboratory at UCL. And it's about a £50 million laboratory in London. It's a giant shed-like structure, but it's a lot more than a shed in that it's got no pillars inside it whatsoever. So it's huge. I'll show you a photograph inside. 40,000 cubic meters of modifiable space exist within Pearl to do things such as recreate an art gallery. So for the study I'm going to talk about tonight, we used innovation funding in UCL to run a showcase for industry where we created a whole art gallery with 12 different pieces of artwork on video screens gathered around through a kind of maze-like sequence of rooms, quite reminiscent for me of a modern art gallery of just wandering from room to room. Rather than having white walls, in this case, we have black theatre curtains to help with the camera tracking that we were going to do, which was kind of very useful in this case. So above this maze, 10 meters up in the ceiling, was an array of 12 cameras, allowing us to record every single centimeter in this maze. And people in the maze were wearing QR coded hats, a QR code on the front and the top. So we invited a large number of participants to come to the Pearl Laboratory, and 102 people were able to put on these hats and then fill out a lot of questions about their background, about how good they thought they were at different things, about their personality, a range of different factors that we thought might be important for what we would then do. And just behind this big screen, we then lined everyone up, as shown in this picture. They all lined up after filling in our demographics and personality questionnaire, and stepped into the space. And you can see people walking around. I'll show you some eye tracking footage in a moment. What we did in one afternoon to look at the experience of crowding on people's behavior in a built piece of architecture was to, first of all, just have people explore a space for 20 minutes. Then they had to navigate for 20 minutes with an interruption in the middle while we altered the space. And again, it's very hard to go into a real art gallery and knock through a wall in the middle of your experiment. But here we were able to do that. We were able to cut through, and we'll show you some of that in a moment. After that, they went back to their seats, were asked to draw a map of the space they'd been in and answer some questions about how they felt about the experience, and a few other questions. And then while they were doing that, filling out more questions and watching some lectures, we took a team and removed all the walls on the inside of the space. And you can see at the bottom here is a large open arena space where it was just open and people could mill around. And they were asked to fill out the space, and then they were asked to find people with a code word. Everyone had a little sheet and they had to go and find each other, and finally had to remember where they'd been in the crowd before and evacuate the space. And then we ran some other test days later on participants remotely. So here's a top-down view into a small section of the space. So there's 12 spaces. It's a very large maze. But I think for 3 people, we put on high-density EEG systems, gel-based systems, working with Klaus Gramann, who flew over from Berlin to help out. And 6 different people were wearing eye trackers inside there. And this is I give you a sense of the eye tracking. So this is somebody performing our navigation task. In their hands, they have a sheet of paper with a unique sequence of artworks to return to. So each of the artworks has a number, and they have to go through and find them. So you can see you can't just walk at full pace through this experiment. And people reported finding this quite competitive, walking through the space. So everyone's on a mission. It's a bit like going through London Underground on the tube system, trying to find your way with lots of people getting in your way. Before this, they just explored the space. But you can see the kind of scale of the crowd and a lot of focus, a lot of people just wandering around. So the whole time everybody's walking around in here, they're being filmed from above, filmed from cameras in the space, and all of those hats have an ultra-wideband tracker in them. And it's that data I'm going to talk about now with a little bit of analysis we've been doing. So the ultra-wideband system can track within a sort of 5-10 centimeter precision where each of these people are, which is sufficient for our purpose here. Here's some eye tracking during evacuation. So now the space is open. The person on the right here, you're seeing the brim of their hat at the top. is very close to the exit. So they make a quick exit out of the space. Person on the left, they're all watching a screen to get a flash. The exit they should go to is just on their right. But you'll see as the alarm goes off about this point, they start to wonder what's going on, that they can't get there because all the other people start walking at them. So everyone turns around and goes, the person on the right's made their way out very safely, but the person on the left does not do the optimal, according to current models, of what people should do when they're evacuating spaces. So we've got a lot of rich data on that. Here's some of the top down. I won't show a movie of it because it's very intense, but sort of groups gathering, walking around. We have all this detail of people gesturing. But what is most interesting, I'll end on this, is the UbiSense tracker data. So this is the layout of the environment. On the left are people, these are the tracking devices as people line up. I go back a little bit. And these are the first people entering and track. This is sped up, I think 3 times real speed. So people don't walk this fast, or participants were a lot more leisurely than is shown here. We have 102 people we're tracking now, walking through this space, exploring this space, some of them standing around, others snaking everywhere. And we can ask a lot of questions now about, do their movement patterns conform to certain models that we would predict about the space? But crucially, does it matter knowing about the demographics or personality of those questions? Currently, the models are used to design, stadiums and transport hubs to give nothing about the person's background demographics. They treat 90-year-olds and 9-year-olds the same. They just move. We didn't have 9-year-olds and 90-year-olds, but we did have 20-year-olds and 75-year-olds in here. And we do see some interesting age patterns in the data. So you can see it starts to get busy as people gather. About this point, we're halfway through, people are starting to navigate now. That eye tracking I showed you at the beginning of people scurrying around is at this point. And we see a cluster of people on the right who are not getting on with the task. So in all the experiments I've described so far tonight, people were sat down, did the experiment, all did it perfectly. When you gather 100 people together for an experiment, people get naughty. They don't do what you're asked them to do. They misbehave in certain ways because they think other people are being watched, not them. And I think this is getting us closer to what happens in the real world when we do this. So there's really dynamic behavior. There's a lot of movement. We're studying this in a lot of detail, and we've only really begun the analysis from September last year. So we're 4 or 5 months into our analysis of this really rich data set. We have two PhD students who'll be working on this for 4 years. Oops, sorry, I go back. I will show you what happens in the. Is at this point they're all asked to stop and wait. I go forward, and then after a period, this wall is removed. And now we see everybody navigate again. And we're curious to see whether that shortcut is being taken optimally, or is it, a poor attracting people through it. Well, we're working on analyzing that. And if I go to the end of this, I can just show you the evacuation behavior as they all have to funnel out of the space. There we go. There we go. So everyone's trying to, this is not rushed evacuation. It's the museum is closing now. Please make your way out. And so a very leisurely, easy evacuation, except for 2 people who hang around talking for some time. Again, probably like a real art gallery. I've been one of those people in the past. They don't really want to leave the art gallery, and then off they go. So this is real data, real people behaving in real ways that models don't tend to pick up. But as I mentioned, we didn't just have a full, sorry, next slide, this one. We also knocked back to open plan the whole space and invited people to fill the space. And you'll see as people get into the space, this is what people did when they were instructed to fill the space. So we're interested to predict, can we predict this pattern of behavior? And as I mentioned, everyone at this point is carrying an envelope with a code word in it. And coming up in this tracking footage, they all open their envelope and they're instructed to find everyone with the same code name. And so people scurry around trying to find each other. First of all, they gather. This is them all watching a screen briefly. And I think, here we go. They're very well behaved at this point, very static. And let me just go. Here we go. So they're now moving around, trying to find each other. We're very interested in patterns where some people stay where they are and ask people to go find people for them. Other people love running around, and we'll be analyzing those patterns with relation to the people's personality. But again, I really want to emphasize a really key part of this research is we could have used camera tracking in Piccadilly Circus to study crowd movements. There's amazing footage out there. There's a Stanford drone footage set used for training AIs. But you don't know whether people are extroverts or introverts. You don't know whether those people love navigating. You don't know whether they grew up in China or London. We know a lot about these people I'm watching on the screen now. And they're starting to form groups at this point in our group experiment. You can see the top group is pretty much formed. So we're able to study a lot of questions with this data set because we not only have the trajectory data, we have people's demographics, personality, and feelings on how they felt about all these things. So, I'll go back just one last bit to show you the evacuation behavior, because that's quite interesting. I can play that. So this is everyone forming up. And you saw this footage previously for the eye tracking, but what you can see now is that the correct thing is to go forwards, and a small fraction of people really do that. So again, we'll be looking at this data to try and model evacuation behavior from buildings. Okay, I'm nearly at the end of my talk, and just to show you where we are now with some of the data and the kinds of things we're finding, is that one of the things you can pull out of that UbiSense tracking pattern we've just seen is people's speed. And so here's the profile of one person, their speed across different time periods, when they're slow, and certain rhythm in their speed. And it's going to be interesting to compare the whole group to see whose speeds line up with each other and when they line up and don't line up, and that speed, and we can get the total distance walked by people and the average speed of different sections. So there's a lot we can gain from people's movement mobility data, but also the emotional responses are very helpful. I go back in my slides, and just to show we have a normal distribution where of distances walked. Some people are walking 1 kilometer in our experiment, and others are walking about, maybe just half a kilometer. So there's kind of people walking double the distance in that experiment. And that's the kind of thing we're quite interested to see. As you'll see in a moment, one of the people's questionnaire questions can tell you a very good amount about that distribution. But we asked people questions about how they felt. One of the most important one was just, did you find that stressful? On a scale of 0, not stressed at all, to 10, the most stressful it could possibly have been. And what we see are 4 different groups. So we group people by either male or female, and whether they were doing the exploration period or the navigation period. What this data shows us is that when exploring in this experiment, people wandering around the art gallery and exploring, there is no difference between men and women's stress reports. And indeed, when men go on to navigate that busy space with lots of people moving around, trying to find their way, there is again no difference in their stress report for that experience. But for the women in our study, some of them are just like the men. They are not stressed out by this experience at all. But there are a number of more women who are reporting finding that process of scurrying around in the space more stressful than the men. And again, these aren't just men and women. We know a lot about each of these participants to try and hone in and sort of find out, why are these women here not stressed at all? And why are these women here more stressed? I mean, if I was in there, I would have rated it as a stressful experience, but not 10 out of 10. And indeed, nobody, I think, rated it. One person dressed, I think maybe, no, it's not clear there. Maybe one person rated it as really stressful. 1 out of 100 said this is the least stressful it could possibly be, which I find hard to believe. I'd imagine there are less stressful things in the world. But anyway, this is giving us a clue into the gender matters and the task matters. And we also found that people who reported finding it more stressful also felt subjectively it was more crowded. So there are a number of features that go together. But just the last two slides I want to now, we're keen to take questions, gives you a range of some of the questions we ask people and their relationship to the metrics I've just got out of the speed. So how far did people walk and how fast did they move? And we see things like there's a very small decline with age in speed, distance traveled. People are curious. They tend to walk further in the navigation. But most interestingly to me, strikingly in our data, the total distance walked in the experiment was quite strongly related to the number of hours people sleep. We'd asked people how many hours they sleep per night, because in 2 previous studies we've run, we found that was related to navigation. So people who don't sleep very much at night tend to navigate less well than people who do. In our experiment, if you completed all the tasks on your sheet, you just started again. So the total distance walked is not related to navigation skill. But here's the graph if we zoom in. If you report sleeping longer, we don't know if they do, of course. This person that claims they get 9 hours, maybe they're getting 5, and they think they're getting great sleep. We'd have to do a follow-up study with detailed sleep monitoring. But that subjective report of sleep is quite strongly related to just how far people walked in our experiment. And this was not an anticipated effect. We knew it. We knew there's a relationship from other studies of distance metrics and sleep. So we knew there was a reason to ask. But this is a radically new result. I had not anticipated this, and it could well be something we follow up. We'll need to replicate it. But it suggests that maybe if you sleep longer, you have more energy in your body to walk further in the world. I've been trying to find other example studies to follow this up, but as far as I know, this is a novel finding that's come from this experiment. But that's, of course, not what we're trying to aim for at the end point of this experiment. We're really interested in pulling apart the multifaceted nature of what it is to be a human with how people behave in given particular situations, tasks we gave people. We want to model that. We want to be able to predict, why does one person do this and another do something quite different? And on that note, differences between people, I'll put up the array of people who've made what I've talked about tonight possible. All of these people I've mentioned in the talk, and they've all been absolutely crucial to everything I've said. And yeah, I'd just like to thank the funders as well, Innovation England, the Ecological Brain Programme, and the Wellcome Trust to help fund those different studies. So thank you very much. I'll stop sharing that screen and take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much, Hugo, for this amazing and interesting and insightful lecture. I think that it has been very interesting, and I would like to open if anyone wants to make any question to Hugo. I think that Ruiz wants to make a question and said, from what I understand in this last study, you were measuring how people react and feel. Did you create a specific path that caused more or less stress and joy for finding a easier path, a sort of IKEA effect?
So did we create spaces that would, a path that would create these effects? Is that what the question was?
Yeah, hi, Hugo. Thank you for the presentation. It's easier to speak. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you.
It's not very good. The question is, when you talk about emotions, we know that the accomplishment is a very powerful emotion, and as you said in the first example, happiness it engages more activity than sorrow or other type of feelings. Did you create different paths easier to find than others, and did you measure were able to measure the effects?
No, that's a great question. So what I didn't manage to say today, because we haven't yet got to it, is a calculation for each person as to how well they navigated. Each person had a totally unique sequence of places to get to. It's possible that some people had slightly harder combinations than others. Like someone could just have a clockwise circle through the space they keep moving in. I don't think that's likely because of the random nature of the screens. But it is something we should look at, whether that had an effect. I think you're right, though. I think it's likely that people who said, I feel quite stressed by this experience, were finding navigating harder. It's also worth noting that we gave 60 people take part in a follow-up virtual reality online test of navigation using an app we created called See Your Request. And there was no difference between men and women in their performance on that test. So this group, I don't think that the stress that women are reporting navigating is necessarily ability, but it could be that it's the the experience they're having of frustratingly finding it. So it'll be really great to look at stress and performance when we get to it, but we haven't yet. But we could create what you said, harder or easier. We didn't do that, and we could in a follow-up though. Thank you.
Yeah, that's why I was calling it the IKEA effect, because when people walk through IKEA and they find a shortcut, you can see in their faces they're happy because, oh, there is a shortcut. I don't have to go all the way around because everything is seen as an effort. Yeah. Thanks. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Luis.
Okay, Hugo, I'm very interested in several topics that if I would like to share with you. I am very interested in the results related to personality. I don't know, you mentioned that have evaluated personality. I don't know if you found significant results. I don't know how measure or what time of measure do you employ. I don't know if you find differences based on the type of personality of some personality traits. I don't know, because my background is very related to personality, and I don't know if it could be influence this type of navigation, or I don't know.
Because we really wanted to focus on, it's great. The personality is very interesting. I haven't really worked on personality as a metric in previous studies, but this felt really important to get at people's personality. We'd love to run a full Big Five. We really considered asking people the Big Five questions to really get all those metrics, and realized that would just piss people off too much. It's good to get that data, but there's only so much we could get. So instead, we worked through the kind of Big Five questions to get the ones that really related to what people were doing. So we really focused on the extrovert, introvert, getting energy from being alone or in parties or being uncomfortable in a crowd. These are standardized questions that are used in other formats. I regret not getting more questions on personality. It would have been interesting. What we have not found so far, so it doesn't seem that people who like being in parties walk further or walk faster. So we're finding that's not telling you anything. But we find that people who like being at parties also think they are great at moving through crowds. We don't know yet whether they are, but there's a time we ask people on a scale to say, do you find it hard negotiating a crowd, or are you great at this? And if you said you're great at that, you're more likely to be someone who's high on, or like you like being the center of attention. So that's a novel finding I've not seen in previous research, but we will need to dig into the data to find patterns that as we get more metrics out, more things will emerge. So yeah, we need to do more with the personality, but I think also we may find there are subgroups of people in the data who like to move more than others, and can we combine metrics? There's a lot ahead for us of analysis.
Yes, I'm sure that it could have an influence in the navigation or other type of variables related to that. On the other hand, I would like to, because I know that you employ like gamification methods for the evaluation of navigation. So I am working with several gamification tools or gamified tools to evaluate different cognitive functions such as attention or memory and like that. And we have found like some difficulties in order to publish several articles based on gamified evaluation, because reviewers found that gamified evaluation methods include other type of like strange variables related to motivation or this type of things. I would like if you can give us like an explanation or your experience in the employment of gamification or gamified tools, and if you think that they are as reliable as this type of more traditional paper and pencil tools that we were employed several years ago. I don't know. I would like to know your opinion in this regard, because I think it's a big issue that we are.
I feel your pain. I mean, we've had, yes. So people are aware, 2016, so 10 years ago, we launched the project Zero Quest. We got funding from Deutsche Telekom, who are the largest mobile network in the world. And they really supported us to bring in a commercial games company to build a spatial navigation test. There's that test we gave to people who did that last experiment to really qualify. And we could do it because of their advertising budget they have. We were able to reach 4 million participants with that. And exactly like you said, we got a lot of questions about, is this really valid? It's a game, it's not a test, you know. And yeah, my opinion is that it is valid. It's not that a lot of the tests that are paper and pencil. My wife is a neuropsychologist. She uses a lot of paper and pencil in a clinical setting to assess children. And they're not gamified. The clinicians have to work really hard to motivate children with them. But the gamification, I think, is valid. Depends what you're trying to do. There might be instances where it's not, but 99% of the time, it's a good idea. And it's really important for you, if it's helpful for you, is the paper I wrote with many other colleagues 2 years ago in Nature Human Behavior on gamification in cognitive science, where each of the people brought together had the same problem you just said. They couldn't get grants funded and they couldn't publish papers because they'd used games, and that it was basically a fight back against that issue. Outlying. So do look at this. This is Alan. I can send a link to you later. Alan and colleagues in Nature Human Behavior. I forgot what the name of the article we wrote was, but it's many leading scientists in there. Yeah, but it depends what you're trying to do. I think if I turned up and tested people in the jungle of the Amazon jungle with a gamified test on a computer, it wouldn't be valid. You know, you can't just put them everywhere. But on prolific or assessing people, I think it's a very valid approach. And we published many papers using it. And crucially, the other things is showing test-retest reliability, ecological reliability. Did these things work? Those are quite important things for these sort of tests. So it can be very, very useful to use gamified tests.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's my opinion.
Yes, I think also we are employing this type of gamification, and we employ like this type of validation correlation with more traditional, and we found significant results, and we have very high correlation. I think that there is a tendency to employ like more ecological validation studies or more ecological evaluation studies, and with I don't know. I think that we can go to more ecological evaluation, but I think that gamified instruments or tools are also valid, and I think that it could be had good application in neuroarchitecture, for example, because we have this type of mixed reality, virtual reality, augmented reality that we can employ for the gamified tools, and I think that it's more modifiable by evaluators, and I think that it could be very useful. Thank you very much for your comment in this sense. I don't know if anyone has any more question.
Oh yeah, there is. I can see it
In the chat. I'm going to.
Oh yeah, there's some great questions in there I have missed. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, there's did the extent of emotional regulation before and after the journey get recorded in the experiment? We didn't get people before. There's lots of things you wanted to do. It's a great question. How are you feeling before? How are you feeling after? It would have been fascinating to ask. And we didn't get that. What we did get before was curiosity. So we asked people on a scale of 0 to 10, how curious are you? What's beyond this big black screen? Quite a number of people were 100% curious about what was going to happen next. But there was a range of people who weren't. One person is 0, not interested. I've come all the way here, but I'm not. So we have found that people who reported more curiosity, I think, walked more. That you can predict some metrics, like statistically, if you were curious, you'll walk more when you get into the art gallery. So when you put all these bits of metrics together, we're hoping we can start to profile. And it's just, as we go through it, it may be that it's, older men, if they're curious, are very predictable. I don't know yet, but we'll do more studies. And the beauty of what I said in this study is we can rerun it, not with the same participants because they've done it already, indeed that might be interesting. But we can take another 100 participants and do the same sort of experiment, exactly the same instructions, same time. And if we can get the same results, great. We might see something different. The point of science is replicability. So next time we could get at your question, there's an excellent one, emotional regulation before and after. I'm hoping the webinar is recorded. Yeah, the questions. Okay, yeah, the question about the tests. And wherever we can, we use something. So the curiosity question I just said is 0 to 10 has been published in a number of other studies where they found they could predict head scanning and things. So we're always trying to take something that's there and ask. And that does sometimes make for messy data. So the personality questions are the questions used in the big five. But they're a bit coarse, I have to say. I could have done with a bit more diversity in the range of scale. And we asked, yeah, most of them are. Some of them are novel because you don't have anything else out there to replicate, to compare it to. Yeah. I think that's those questions covered in the chat so far.
Okay. So I don't know if anyone wants to make any comment or.
I had a question, but I didn't dare to do it because I wanted to give the chance to other people. But since nobody else chose, I'll show it. My research is in retail, and my research is in applying neuroscience to retail design. Mostly on the side of improving the project, not on the side of selling more. It's not a question for me. How do you see? I was watching the maze that you created, and as I said, it sounded a lot like IKEA, and it also sounds like the type of challenges that we have in the spaces when we are designing spaces. Do you see the potential for this type of research? For retail design, for that type of what results could we expect to get from here? What do you see?
Yeah, no, it's a really great. I am interested in retail space from this. You're absolutely right. I mean, all spaces, we just happen to go for black curtains and grey floor because of the camera system, and art gallery just seemed like the easiest. I've been in weirder spaces that are art galleries than that experience, so it felt really thematically consistent. We could have mocked up a supermarket or lots of other things, but they all take more effort. However, I think the fundamental way people move is quite hard to shake off. That you have a certain natural speed you want to move, and the way you interact is quite hard to fake some of these things. So I think the kind of answers around retail would be more around understanding, like profiling of people's movement patterns with their personality and their background demographics, that you might start to get kind of like, is this a shop for younger women or older men, or that what are the patterns you might expect out of people's movements, and where would you then place things, and what would engagement show you? I mean, here we looked at excitement and stress, so I didn't talk about excitement, I just talked about stress, but again, we can look and see if there are patterns in there that are predictive of excitement.
We have many data, especially from marketing, but it's very hard to prove. There are sort of sector rules or norms or whatever, or convictions, and they fail to prove. Then in the field, it's very different, the way it works. Like we have this motto, like to find a promotion, it's the same like getting a reward, the feeling in the brain, but that's mottos. We don't know if that's really like that. And even today, people get a smartphone in their hand and they change completely their movement. And for us, that we are designing the spaces to take all that into account and to make it easier, because we know that people in the stores only see like 1% of the products. If you talk about 20 or 2,000 products in the supermarket, they see 100 at most. It means they don't really have a choice. So as a designers, it's our responsibility to make it affordable, and that's. But yeah.
No, I agree. I think as well, you want people to come and have a great experience if possible, work out what it is, not just the selling of the product. They want to come back and buy more.
Even today, much more experiential than transactional. We are not so much care about the sale. You want to make a agreeable place, a good experience, and people flow well. Yeah.
Mhm.
You're empowered also, not manipulated also.
Yeah, there's a lot we can do here, and our experiment is just one. We are going to go back. We've got funding to go back and run more. Like we did one afternoon for what I showed you today, but we intend to do a whole week of different things. So we compress the space, stretch the space, have 1, 2, small numbers, big numbers, and just vary parameters about people in the space and try and really get a handle on what's going on. But it's hard because, that is a stark art gallery, and what happens in a retail space is another matter. But we'll get there. We'll keep chipping away at all these problems. And it's great to get the questions tonight. And thank you all for listening very much to the research we've been doing.
Okay, so thank you very much, Hugo, for this amazing intervention. Thank you very much for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
So yes, I think that we can finish the lecture for today. I would like to say that for those attending who are not enrolled in our master, you can find the full information about the program on our website and through our social media channels. You will have all of the information. We will upload this lecture in our YouTube channel, so you can watch wherever you want in our channel about the Master of Neuroarchitecture in the University of Alicante. So thank you very much for attending. Thank you very much, Hugo, for this amazing intervention, for your lecture. And I hope to see you again in future session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Take care. Bye.